The question I asked at the beginning is, what on earth is Doug Ford afraid of? Because we've had, I mean, there are low-level bureaucrats that are testifying. We've had city councilors. We've had Ottawa business representatives. We've had a public servant that didn't like the sounds of horns honking that was testifying. Why is Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who has been, to my knowledge, the only premier to be enthusiastically in favor of the Emergencies Act, why is he willing to go to court to protect himself from having to appear, to defend a piece of legislation that he supports? That is going to be the key question here. Now, this, as I mentioned, it has become a bit of a subplot taking place outside of the commission. But Doug Ford initially last week said, oh, no, they haven't asked me. That's why I'm there. Leaving the implication that he would go if they were to ask him. So the commission, and I don't know what date, said, okay, well, let's ask him. They asked him, and he has not appeared in that time. And I want to pull up the exact wording that the commission used in its letter here, because I think it's actually quite important. And I just had it 5 tabs ago, so I'll pull that up in a second. But what the commission said in its letter was that we've asked you, and now we're issuing a summons. And that, I think, was so key. So they said, we asked you, and you said no. So this means that Doug Ford was saying something that was patently untrue, or maybe this all was just a little misunderstanding that took place in the days since. But one thing is for sure, he doesn't want to go, and I don't know why that is. If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't be afraid to go under oath and defend this thing. And as an Ontario voter, and by the way, an Ontario citizen who stood as a candidate for Doug Ford's Progressive Conservatives in 2018, it is absolutely shameful that this man who calls himself a premier for the people is standing up and standing, by his own words, shoulder to shoulder with Justin Trudeau on this heavy-handed crackdown that suspended civil liberties, all done to protect the narrative around a mandate that in and of itself suspended people's rights. And Doug Ford decides that this is how he wants to score his brownie points with Justin Trudeau, by standing shoulder to shoulder. It is absolutely shameful, and it's despicable that he is now too afraid to take a stand before the Public Order Emergency Commission under oath and defend why it is exactly that Ontario supported that, when Ontario didn't need it to deal with the Windsor blockade, which was widely regarded as being far more disruptive than anything happening in Ottawa. I want to, just before we close things out here, talk about a few more of the updates that have come out of the commission today. Obviously, there have been a number of revelations from interim police chief Steve Bell, who we just learned the other day is not going to be the permanent police chief. So Ottawa has hired someone else. But I want to play one clip here where Steve Bell says that he had no knowledge of how his police officers were dealing with the arrests of protesters. And because Ottawa Police and the OPP, all of the stakeholders involved, they were doing this catch and release type thing just to get people out of the core. But listen to Steve Bell say, well, all of a sudden we had a plan, we knew what were going on, but on this, I had no idea what was happening.
So you're going to hear evidence eventually from some of the protesters when they eventually testify. That some of the ones that were arrested, upon their release, they were essentially kidnapped by OPS officers, driven out of town in the middle of February winter by OPS officers, and left in various rural areas and parking lots outside of town with no shelter or resources. Are you aware of that?
No, because I don't know the specifics of what they're speaking about. What I do know is that we, as part of our planning, and Inspector Lucas tomorrow will be able to provide more details, but we did have remote arrest processing sites, not in rural Ottawa, in the south end of Ottawa, in a residential mixed commercial area where they were processed and then released to be able to find transportation to wherever they needed to go, which is common with the police.
Right. So one of the areas, there was several, as I understand. One of them was a municipal parking lot where the trucks were being towed to.
That's correct. That's
right.
In the south end.
Right. And that parking lot doesn't have a building you drop them off at. It doesn't have a phone. It doesn't have any of that, does it?
So I don't know what the logistics at the building were. I would imagine it would have needed to have a phone because you have to be able to call your lawyer. So
Well, I can tell you it didn't. So, and these people driven out there, they were already told they weren't charged, and they weren't being charged, they were being released. But they were driven and forced outside of Ottawa or in the outer skirts and dropped off in the snow. Now, are you aware this happened, yes or no?
no, I'm not aware, and it wasn't outside of Ottawa. It was still within the geographical boundaries of the city of Ottawa.
Oh, well, it's in the geographical boundaries of the city, so that's fake news. Yeah, well, 3 inches within the city limits, we dump you in a patch of snow and take your phone and all of that, and, well, Bob's your uncle. Everything's supposed to be fine. That letter that I referenced a moment ago, I want to read a bit of here, because it's from the co-lead counsel, Shantona Chowdhury, for the Public Order Emergency Commission. She writes, "The information gathered by Commission counsel in the course of the investigation made clear that Premier Ford and Minister Jones would have evidence, particularly within their knowledge, that would be relevant to the Commission's mandate. On September 19th, 2022, Commission counsel requested an interview with them. This request was refused. Commission counsel renewed this request multiple times. All requests were refused. Commission counsel then requested that Premier Ford and Minister Jones agree to testify before the commission voluntarily. As of last week, the invitation to attend to testify before the commission has been declined for the moment. It was our hope that Premier Ford and Minister Jones would agree to appear before the commission voluntarily. However, given that the repeated invitations were all declined, the commission has issued summons this day to Premier Ford and Minister Jones pursuant to Section 4 of the Inquiries Act. The commission thanks you for your request and your continued participation in this inquiry." So when Doug Ford said last week that no one had asked him, that was fundamentally untrue. The commission says on September 19th, they first asked him and have repeated and renewed that request multiple times. So I go back to, what is it that Doug Ford is so afraid of in appearing before this commission? And I'm so challenged by how people are looking at this and coming out with the conclusion that the Emergencies Act was justified. Police incompetence, government incompetence, bureaucratic incompetence, and jockeying for position between levels of government does not constitute in the least a national emergency. And a lot of the narratives, even that were put up to support this idea of violence, have shattered. For example, there was a rumor, and I think it was reported in media early on, of some threat against Rideau Hall. Well, Interim Chief Steve Bell said that didn't actually happen.
Somebody sent information to the former chief directly. Somebody wrote, "I lay awake tonight as I read Twitter posts from the extreme right vowing attacks on Rideau Hall this weekend. Some are calling for action akin to the happenings in Washington on Capitol Hill. I understand the right to peaceful protest, but I'm writing as a very concerned citizen, as we're not hearing any reassurances from the city or policing regarding the safety of residents surrounding these vulnerable and targeted spots."
There was national security representatives, including CSIS and the RCMP, in our joint intelligence group. So again, this was information that was taken in, assessed, evaluated, put towards our threat assessment, and ultimately this didn't bear out to be accurate. There was no threats made against Rideau Hall.
Weird. So that might have just been some of that misinformation we need to get to the bottom of. No threats against Rideau Hall, just like there was no attempted arson by anyone connected to the convoy, just like police exonerated convoy participants from the issue that happened at the Cenotaph early on with a woman dancing, and so on. But it's that old line about how a lie makes its way around the world. I don't know what the original quote was, however many times. Well, the truth is still putting its pants on. I am not going to subject you to 8 hours of Steve Bell, because if you wanted 8 hours of Steve Bell, you could have watched today's hearings before the Public Order Emergency Commission. But what I am going to talk about right now is the importance of language. Now, police officers, and I have some in my family, are normally very precise about language, because in law, words mean things and words are defined in very particular ways. So Steve Bell was talking about violence, the violence that people in the convoy world that were living in Ottawa, not part of the convoy, violence they were being subjected to. And again, we've heard reports from OPP intelligence that violence wasn't actually taking place. We didn't see from Ottawa police charges of violence by and large. So where is this violence coming from? If you're going to make a drive-by comment like that, what is it you actually mean? Well, turns out Steve Bell has redefined what violence means.
So is it fair to say that when you use the phrase violence, you're not actually describing any form of physical assaults, are you?
Well, physical assaults do contribute to what I'm describing. I was specifically describing the violence that our community felt as a result of the culmination of actions that the occupiers engaged in.
So the violence that they felt, not actual violence, is that what you're saying?
That is correct. Not the criminal code definition of violence, but the violence that they felt by having incessant horns blared.
Right. And
by having trucks run 24/7 a day.
Right.
By having people intimidate them and follow them, and by having people rip masks off their head, by feeling sheltered in their homes.
Well, thank you. I understand what you mean. But you're not talking about violence under Section 2 of the CSIS Act, are you?
No, I'm not.
Thanks.
The violence. So he's talking about microaggressions now. The violence you feel. It's like, the violence grows from the heart outward, to merge that with Justin Trudeau. The violence you feel. So you could go to police, and I would imagine if you were to call up a 911 in Ottawa and say, I feel murdered, they'd be like, well, hang on a minute. If you're making the call, I don't think you were murdered. No, I feel murdered. I feel like someone has killed me. Okay. I feel like my car was broken into. Was your car broken into? No, but I feel just like collectively the world around me has made it feel like that. And then he says, no, I don't mean violence in the criminal code sense. He certainly didn't mean violence in the Section 2 of the CSIS Act sense. He means the collective feeling of violence. So take from that what you will, but we are just redefining words left, right, and center. I will say, good news, he didn't get anyone to have to translate that. He was able to explain what his definition of violence was in England. So take that, Councillor Matthew Fleury.